This podcast is sponsored by the Tree of Life Memorials and Digital in Stone. This is a new platform to create digital memorials, environmental legacies, and fine art monuments. This way we could share the stories, preserve the memories, conserve the land, and connect the souls, because love never dies.
This podcast does not provide medical nor legal advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, a nurse practitioner, and I use my experience from working as a nurse for 45 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, and here to offer an every-person viewpoint to our podcast. We are both here because we believe that the more you know, the better prepared you are before a crisis hits.
So welcome to this week's show. Please relax and get yourself something comforting to drink, maybe some pie. Oh, God, help us. And thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me as we talk about aggression. Like the BBC, we see our shows offering entertainment, enlightenment, and education, and divide the show into three halves to address each of these goals. Our main topic is in the second half, so feel free to fast forward to that chatter-free section if you need to. In the first half, Charlie talks about the Silt Nazi concentration camp that was built on British soil. In the second half, I'm going to talk about aggression. And in the third half, Charlie has some tips about how to handle aggressive situations. So, Charlie, how are you?
I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. And you?
Well, I'm living the dream, baby. Living the dream.
Living a dream, exactly.
What are you mad about, or is that just your shtick?
That was just my shtick. But, angry, aggression, what, we'll be discussing today. I don't know. It's not exactly the same, Marianne, but, I think folks will be interested in what we have to say about all this.
I think so, too. So, do you have a recipe for us?
Yes, I do. Our recipe this week is for a Jewish apple cake, which is a wonderful combination of apples and cinnamon that is destined to be devoured at your next funeral luncheon. Bon appetit.
Oh, Julia, where are you?
Yeah.
I want to make this. I gotta buy some apples. I want to make that cake. The recipe sounds so good.
It does. Mail me a slice.
I can mail you a picture of it and a picture of me eating it.
Well, fine. That's fine. Maybe throw a piece of a scoop of ice cream, vanilla ice cream on that.
Yeah, doesn't that sound good?
Yep. What doesn't sound good is that the Smithsonian Magazine published a story last year by Christopher Parker about Nazi concentration camps on British soil. Yep, a piece of Holocaust history that has been largely ignored for 8 decades. The British government is now, for the first time, investigating the German occupation of Alderney, one of Britain's Channel Islands, and the concentration camps there that were forgotten by history. The Channel Islands have a complex relationship with the United Kingdom. While they are dependencies of the British Crown, they are located closer to France. Due to their location, Prime Minister Winston Churchill decided in 1940 that Britain couldn't defend them from Nazi invasion. The takeover by Hitler's armies was swift. When the Germans arrived at Alderney, they found that it was nearly empty. Almost all residents had managed to evacuate and built several camps on the uninhabited island. There are still many questions about what really went on in Alderney and who knew what. For too long, some have been too willing to look the other way in the hope it all goes away, Jewish heritage researcher Marcus Roberts said. In 2020, archaeologists released a study in the journal Antiquity, investigating Alderney's Silt concentration camp. It primarily held prisoners from Soviet territories as well as French Jews. While it wasn't the only camp the Nazis built on Alderney, it was known to be especially brutal. Some historians say that prisoners at Sylt faced conditions harsher than in some of the more famous mainland camps. Due to the remote location, quote, even less food found its way to the prisoners than it did in other parts of occupied Europe, historian Paul Sanders said. How many prisoners died in Albany has long been a matter of dispute, and officials hope that the new investigation will determine the true death toll. Numbers matter because the truth matters. The dead deserve the dignity of the truth, says Lord Eric Pickles, the UK's Holocaust envoy and leader of the new initiative. Some people don't want to believe anything happened, and some believe thousands and thousands died. I don't think the truth can ever hurt us, Pickles said.
Isn't that an amazing story? I mean, I never knew that. Did you?
No, not at all. And I'm sure this isn't the only one, but it's just that thing of hiding things. You think, oh, I want to protect somebody from something, and in the end, no, it's either a more hurtful situation or, things can really go south. Things can really become bad.
Or if you don't know about these things, then it's easy to say, oh, I never learned about that. That's all made up. That's all alternative history or an alternative truth, as if there is such a thing as an alternative truth, because an alternative truth is really just a lie, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's easy perhaps for some people to say, well, I never heard about this Sylt place, that can't possibly be true. And
or it can't possibly affect me. Yeah.
Right. Or the situations that happened during World War II have no relevance to me and to our future. And they do.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah. So please go to our webpage for this week's recipe for apple cake and additional resources for this program. Your tax-deductible donations are always welcome so that we can continue to offer you quality programming. Thank you in advance for making your donation at www.everyonedies.org. That's every, the number one, dies.org. Marianne?
Thank you, Charlie. When I was in college, I took a history class, and our instructor said that the lesson of World War II was that you can't appease an aggressor. And I've always remembered that. I've been in many situations in my life where I've encountered aggressive people, and I've my brain would go back to that, is that you can't appease them. There's nothing that you're going to be able to do that's going to change how an aggressor behaves. So I thought for this week that we could talk about this topic of aggression, because we see aggression within our own families, we see it within our own government, we see it within interactions with perhaps even healthcare practitioners, we can see it as caregivers. So let's kind of delve into this a little bit. So what is appeasement? Appeasement is a diplomatic strategy where concessions are offered to an aggressor nation to prevent or delay a war. One of the most infamous instances of appeasement was the Munich Agreement in 1938. Great Britain, led by Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, sought to avoid war with Nazi Germany. Britain and France allowed Germany to annex the Sudetenland, which is a region of Czechoslovakia, without resistance. This move was an attempt to appease Adolf Hitler and prevent further conflict. Unfortunately, it ultimately failed to prevent World War II. We each may be fighting our own wars, dealing with serious illness, death, dying, or bereavement. So let's get into this. We live in interesting times as we watch what could be history repeating itself. Historical archives offer enlightenment regarding power structures during World War II, having knowledge of atrocities against the Jews and not acting. For example, in the Vatican, archives of a letter were recently found that suggest that World War II-era Pope Pius XII was aware thousands of Jews were being killed in gas chambers in occupied Poland, undercutting earlier Vatican arguments justifying the Pope's wartime silence on the Holocaust. The Washington Post reporter Sammy Westphal wrote that following decades of pressure from Jewish organizations and historians, the Vatican in 2020 opened its secret archives on the wartime Pope Pius XII, who headed the Catholic Church from 1939 to 1958. Pius XII has since become one of the most controversial pontiffs for not publicly condemning the Nazis during the war, with critics dubbing him Hitler's Pope. Others, including the Vatican, have argued his diplomacy saved lives in part by preventing a Nazi backlash. A newly unveiled document has added fuel to the debate. It's a German letter sent by German Jesuit member of the anti-Nazi resistance, Father Lothar Koenig, and addressed to the Pope's trusted private secretary, Reverend Robert Lieber. In the letter, found by Vatican archivist Giovanni Cocco, dated December 14, 1942, Koenig wrote that up to 6,000 people, above all Poles and Jews, were dying every day in SS furnaces at the Nazi-run Belzec concentration camp that was in then-occupied Poland. In the years since Pope Pius XII's papacy ended, critics have scrutinized his actions or supposed inaction during the war. Holocaust survivors have lobbied to freeze his sainthood process. When the millions of pages in the Pius archives were opened in 2020, Pope Francis said the Church was not afraid of history and that Pius's papacy had moments of grave difficulties, tormented decisions of human and Christian prudence, and to some could appear as reticence. In his 2022 book, The Pope at War, historian and anthropologist David Ketzer argued that Pius put the Catholic Church ahead of moral leadership, fearful that hostility toward Hitler might cause the countries to break with the Church. Pius XII had also initially thought he could negotiate with Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler and temper Nazi hatred with diplomacy, the author wrote. While the Pope acted carefully amid initial concerns that Axis powers may eventually control Europe, Pius XII never changed his approach, even as evidence and pleas for the Vatican to take a stand mounted. As a moral leader, Pius XII must be judged a failure, the historian wrote. Now, the late Duke of Windsor is most known for abdicating the throne in 1936, less than a year after being crowned King Edward VIII, to marry American divorcee Wallis Simpson. But documents exist that suggest the Duke's dealing with the Nazis during World War II were extensive, and that his actions were covered up by the British government after the war. So the former king was exiled from Britain. There was much hurt, rage, and misunderstanding. As a lot of documents might suggest, the Duke was terrifyingly open to Germany and what he felt the Germans could offer him. In 1937, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor set off on a tour of Germany where the Nazi regime was in full control of the country. The trip did not mean that the Duke was a Nazi, but he was certainly sympathetic. Even after the war, he thought Hitler was a good fellow and that he'd done a good job in Germany. But the Duke was also anti-Semitic before, during, and after the war. In May 1939, when Britain was on the brink of war, the Duke recorded a message to the British public from his office in France. While the address was heard around the world, the BBC refused to air it. He said Britain should be doing all in its power to come to terms with Nazi Germany. The BBC were furious because they felt that the impartiality of the BBC would be infringed upon by airing that tape, and they felt that the Nazis were using the Duke of Windsor for their own propaganda, which they were. 4 months later, in September 1939, war broke out. In the following days of the Second World War, the Allies found a trove of German files buried in the forest of Germany, including about 60 documents that appear to contain correspondence between agents working around the Duke of Windsor and Nazi Germany. The collection is now known as the Marburg Files. Included in the Marburg Files was a top-secret cable from the German ambassador in Lisbon to Berlin that read, quote, "The Duke of Windsor is convinced that if he had remained on the throne, war would have been avoided. And he characterizes himself as a firm supporter of a peaceful arrangement with Germany. The Duke definitely believes that continued severe bombing would make England ready for peace." So here we have the former King of Great Britain saying that if you bomb Britain, bomb his family, bomb his country, that's the best way to bring them around for peace. He's quite prepared to go to those lengths to achieve his objectives. On September 13th, 1940, the Germans attacked London, flew down the Mall, and bombed Buckingham Palace. The documents were supposed to be destroyed at the end of the war. They were communications between the Foreign Ministry in Berlin and German Secret Service agents. And it gives us literally a day-by-day account of the Duke's involvement with the Nazi regime. Winston Churchill then colluded with the Duke and others to kill the story, to completely extinguish the story from the record. The Duke of Windsor spent 35 years in exile, and he never lived in Britain again. So does history repeat itself? Attempting to appease an aggressor often leads to further aggression. It's essential to stand firm and assert boundaries when faced with hostility. In the words of Winston Churchill, "An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile, hoping it will eat him last." In challenging situations, maintaining self-respect and advocating for peace through strength can be more effective than yielding to aggression. Or, as Stephen Fry said, "I am gay. I'm a Jew. My mother lost over a dozen of her family to Hitler's anti-Semitism. Every time in Russia, and it's constantly, a gay teenager is forced into suicide, a lesbian is correctively raped, gay men and women beaten to death by neo-Nazi thugs, while the Russian police stand idly by, the world is diminished, and I, for one, weep anew to see history repeat itself." But rather than weep, let's pay attention to the underlying motivations of the people we interact with, or even political leaders. As you deal with serious illness or even deal with difficult people in healthcare, there are ways to manage these situations. Remember, you can't appease an aggressor or reason with an unreasonable person. However, there are techniques to better manage such unpredictable situations. And Charlie has some ideas for us in our third half.
Dealing with someone who has anger issues can be challenging, but there are effective strategies you can employ to navigate these situations. Here are some recommendations. 1. Stay calm and avoid lashing out. When faced with someone's anger, try to remain calm and avoid reacting impulsively. Even if it's difficult, refrain from lashing out in response. 2. Give space and communicate. Allow the person to self-regulate by giving them space. Let them know that you are open to talking once both of you have calmed down. Effective communication is essential during these moments. 3. Set emotional and physical boundaries. Prioritize your own well-being by setting emotional and physical boundaries. Communicate these limits both before and after heated conflicts, rather than during the heat of the moment. 4. Use I statements. Instead of making accusatory statements, express your feelings using I statements. For example, say, I felt sad and scared when you yelled at me. Be authentic about the impact of their anger on you and the relationship. 5. Follow up with requests. After expressing your feelings, follow up with how you'd like to feel and how you'd like to be treated. For instance, say, I want to feel, or I request. 6. Avoid unhelpful statements. Don't say things like, why are you angry? It's not a big deal. Or stop being so emotional. Stop being so sensitive. Stop being so dramatic. 7. Remember your role. When listening to a loved one with anger management issues, remind yourself that it's not your responsibility to fix it. You don't need to change yourself to avoid or stop their anger. 8. Take a time out. If the situation escalates, call a timeout. Give each other at least 20 minutes to regulate and calm down. Avoid replaying the incident in your mind during this time. Consider taking a walk if possible. 9. Prioritize safety. Create a safety plan if necessary. Know who you can call and where you can go to leave a dangerous situation. Seek support for domestic violence if needed. To summarize, dealing with anger issues involves staying calm, setting boundaries, using effective communication, and prioritizing safety. Remember that you're not responsible for fixing someone else's anger.
So have you been in situations where these tips would have been helpful to you?
Yes, several, but it's only been effective, I would say, like half the time. There are so many angry people now. So many people feel threatened just if you have a different point of view. So sometimes I have to stand up and walk away. This has really not happened with someone I know for a while. But just in everyday situations, there was just no talking to the person. And on a couple of occasions, the person started to follow me.
Oh my goodness.
I didn't say anything. I didn't make a face or anything. I just kept it neutral. Just got up, walked away. And I was followed. It was so, yeah. So yeah,
there's so much rage that you read about, like when you're driving, people will pull guns and do things like that.
Yeah.
And I think about, I took a safe driving class once, and they said, if you're in a situation like that, just slow down, let them get ahead, let them do what they're going to do. And, if they're ahead of you and you slow down and they slow down, I mean, you could keep slowing down. I wouldn't stop, but it kind of diffuses it, because if you're not playing, it's just not fun anymore.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's hard because you're angry too with, how they're behaving, or how, whatever the situation is.
Yeah.
But
because they can
escalating it is not going to help.
and it can escalate very, very quickly. Yeah. The thing that Clint Eastwood used to say when he was playing Dirty Harry.
Make my day.
No, a man has got to know his limitations. And then, Dirty Harry would go and do what needed to be done. Yeah, that's the movies. It's not you and me, folks. So.
Yeah, don't say to anybody, make my day, because they just...
Well, yeah, I mean, who's going to say that anymore? But just the attitude behind it.
Oh my gosh, who knows? Who knows when people get mad what they could say or do?
Yeah. So you got to step away. It's not, not that you're losing face or anything. Actually, you are taking control of the situation.
I mean, people get mad at me on Facebook for,
Right. Yeah.
if I post about, a podcast, and, I've had people like, respond, I'm here trying to live. Don't just, I don't want to hear about this death stuff. And, as I always say, well, if it's, in a cancer group, it's like, just because you have cancer doesn't mean that that is what's going to cause your death. It could be anything at any time, at any minute. And that doesn't mean that you don't need to be prepared. Or
Right.
if it's not you, then there's other people in your life. I mean, we can pretend it's not going to happen, but it is. But people will get really angry with me. And my response is just generally, I don't engage with it because they have their own stuff that's going on. But what I say is, everyone dies, and we if we like it or not, we need to be prepared for it. And I kind of just leave it there. Like, I'm not posting something about what we're doing to aggravate you.
Right.
We're here using our time and our own resources because we don't want you to be in a situation of a bad and painful death. That sucks.
Yeah. And then the afterlife of that, if you will, if you are, the people who did not die and all that preparation has not been done. What I mean by that, like a will, healthcare proxy, and all that sort of stuff. You think it was tough while the person was dying? You ain't seen nothing yet. Now that's going to be compounded. I mean, having to deal with lawyers, all the money that has to go into that. Yeah, just prepare.
And it all could have been avoided.
Yes.
So, the aggression can come from fear. The anger can come from fear. It can come from lots of sources, but you don't have to engage in it. You don't have to, get your panties all bunched up from it. You need to stay safe, take the suggestions that Charlie gave, keep things, I think, in an historical context. Think we've been down this road before. Can we make some different choices this time? And make good choices.
Yep. Yeah. And that takes care of this week's episode, folks. Please stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. This is Charlie Navarrete, and from actress Diana Rigg, in the throes of cancer, it's gone on too long. Push me over the edge.
And I'm Marianne Matzo. We'll see you next week. Remember, every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.